June 6th, 1944, off the coast of Normandy, France. The sea is gray, like old steel. Wind has a bite to it that stings the face and makes the gunmetal of the landing craft look dull and raw. Waves lift the bow, drop it, and throw spray over men already soaked with sweat and fear. You're on one of those boats now, pressed against ribbed plywood walls, hearing diesel cough and bark beneath your feet, feeling the hull vibrate with the rhythm of a small, stubborn heart. A young corporal in a wet wool uniform twists his head toward the stern, where the coxswain clamps the throttle down and the engine answers with a harsh, urgent roar. Men shout orders, not calm orders, the sharp, thin kind that come from mouths clenched to a jawline set against panic. The ramp is chained. Ahead, the beach is a flat smear of sand and smoke, dotted with stakes and obstacles and the slow-moving shapes of armored tractors and twisted metal. Bullets stitch the air. A mortar splash throws a geyser of sand a dozen yards away. The corporal tastes salt and copper and something else. The grease from his own hands, the oil from the engine, the metallic tang of a world that has suddenly become very small and very loud. This is a Higgins boat. From the outside, it looks plain. A boxy hull, a low profile, a blunt bow. Up close, it smells of pine, tar, and hot metal. The bow has a hinge hidden in the metalwork, a heavy chain, and a man's life tied to its release. A sailor leans forward, cuts the chain with a bayonet. The ramp drops like a trapdoor, and men pour forward, boots thudding, rifles held tight. The ramp lifts a wall of seawater and sand, and for a second, the whole boat is turned into a channel for men to be pushed forward into chaos. On the water this morning, there are hundreds of them, each boat a small, ugly miracle. They are the same craft crossing the English Channel that were built for swamp and river and shallow shorelines a world away in southern Louisiana. Out here, they are the line between transport and survival. Without them, the men on the beach would not have arrived as they did. Not in numbers, not carrying the gear, not with the speed that mattered. The craft that cut through the surf and put men ashore with a ramp at the front was called the LCVP, Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel. But everyone on the water calls them Higgins boats, after the man who refused to accept the limits others set for him. To understand why a boxy wooden boat mattered so much, you have to go back to a different smell. The sweet rot of river mud, the resinous scent of fresh-cut timber, the iron tang of a small factory on the edge of the swamp. You have to go to a low, hot yard full of men in overalls, and to the man who runs it. Andrew Jackson Higgins is not an engineer in the academic sense. He is a builder whose hands remember curves and joints the way some men remember friends' faces. He grew up in the Louisiana bayous, where the water finds its way into everything: the land, the weather, the work. He knows how to make a hull ride a shallow, marshy current without turning over. He knows how a boat must sit when it carries a mule, a crate, a man. In his shop, the air smells of varnish, sawdust, and the acrid smoke of a metalworker's torch. Machines clank, men laugh in low throats. There's a radio on a shelf playing jazz that mixes with the noise of planes overhead. Training planes at first, then the drone of transports as war spreads across the world. Higgins' yard builds boats for Cajuns, for fishermen, for men who need to go where the water is thin and mean. The boats are practical, shallow draft, flat bottoms, able to slide up onto mud and then back into water without damage. They lean into surf. They can be pushed off a sandbar by a single man and not fall apart. Those small craft are the nursery for an idea that will soon be called crazy by men in suits with meat ties and rigid standards. The crazy idea is plain when Higgins voices it. He says, make a boat with a bow that opens. Not a ladder, not a side hatch, but a bow that drops down like the mouth of a barn. Put men and jeeps and mortar teams inside and bring them right to the beach. He talks about a hull that's flat enough to sit in shallow water, strong enough to take the pounding of surf, and cheap and fast to build in numbers. His hands sketch the shape in the air, shallow, wide, and with a metal ramp hinged at the front. He talks like a man describing a tool that must do a job and not win any beauty contests. The Navy hears this and tilts its head. The Army hears it and frowns. Designers in shipyards and government labs have ideas about what a landing craft should be. Complex hulls, expensive steels, calculations done on a clean slate. Higgins' boat is made of plywood and steel plate, built where the water is shallow and the men are tough. It is not elegant, it is not polite, it is practical. Inside Higgins' office, a small brass bell sits on a desk. Men come in and out. Higgins' voice is low but quick, and his temper is a short fuse. He argues with inspectors, he argues with officers, he argues with bankers. When the War Department finally sends specifications, he does not throw them away. He studies them, then goes back to what his hands know, to swamp boats that have always solved the same problems in a small way. He bolsters the keel, he adds armor plates where bullets might bite, and he makes the bow ramp heavy enough to take a jeep's weight. There are early tests that end badly. A prototype pitches in surf and fills with water. Men curse and bail. The engineers write reports and cross their arms, but Higgins keeps at it. He listens to boatmen who know waves by the way the grass grows on a bank. He modifies the hull, he moves the bilge pumps, he reshapes the chine. He makes the boat simple so it can be built fast. A standard hull, a set of wooden frames, plates and rivets where needed. The LCVP that emerges is not a single stroke of genius, but the result of a lifetime of small inventions welded together by stubbornness. The next time the boat hits surf, it rides it. The ramp holds. A jeep wheels out. Men stumble onto sand and keep moving. What makes the boat revolutionary is not just the ramp, not just the flat bottom, but that it transfers men and equipment from mothership to shore in one motion. The sea is no longer a final barrier, it becomes a medium to cross with purpose. Back on the channel, with the sky full of tracers and the beach a thicket of noise and metal, you feel why this mattered. The LCVP does not make the danger smaller. It does not make bullets friendlier, but the ramp hands the first line of infantry a chance to move at once, carrying heavy loads and heavy intent. The craft that rolled out of Higgins' yard from simple timber and muscle now opens its mouth onto the sands of Europe and the islands of the Pacific. For the men inside, it is the last shelter before the next terrible step. For commanders, it is the tool that finally lets them put armor and men ashore where they once could not. When Navy inspectors visit his yard for the first time, Higgins greets them with sawdust still in his shirt. They come armed with clipboards and skepticism. His workers, mostly carpenters and welders from the docks, pause to watch as the visitors poke at hulls with pencils and whisper to each other. The inspectors want to see blueprints and specifications. Higgins points to a finished boat and says, "There's your blueprint. Take it out and see what it does." That attitude doesn't win him friends in uniform. The Navy at the time believes in tradition. Steel hulls, deep drafts, and slow, careful production in established shipyards. Higgins' boats, built of plywood and held together with raw nerve, look crude. But his confidence and the performance of his swamp-tested craft begins to chip away at their doubt. The first real opening comes from the U.S. Marine Corps. The Marines have been wrestling with the problem of amphibious assault for years, how to land men and vehicles on a hostile beach without drowning them or smashing their gear against the surf. Their early landing boats, like the Navy's Eureka craft, worked fine for calm water, but fail when hitting the shore under load. Marines at Quantico test Higgins' designs and send word back that his Eureka boat handles better than anything they've seen. That catches the attention of a few stubborn officers who care more about results than rank. They invite Higgins to Washington. He arrives in a tan suit and a wide grin, carrying a stack of sketches and a temper he barely keeps in check. When a Navy officer dismisses his boat as a fisherman's toy, he slams his fist on the table and dares them to build something better. The room falls silent. Someone mutters that he's crazy. Higgins just nods. That crazy energy becomes his trademark. He fights for contracts, fights for materials, fights even with his own engineers. But the Marines keep pushing for his boats, and as the world edges closer to war, the tone in Washington changes. By 1941, after Pearl Harbor, the U.S. military needs every possible way to get men from ship to shore fast. Suddenly, Higgins' once dismissed design becomes urgent. His Eureka boat evolves into the LCVP, the Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel. The key change is the ramp at the bow. Originally inspired by Japanese landing crafts spotted during the war in China, Higgins adapts the idea to his own flat-bottomed hull. The ramp lets soldiers charge straight ahead rather than climbing awkwardly over the sides. It seems simple now, but at the time it's revolutionary. Production explodes. Higgins Industries grows from a few hundred workers to over 20,000. His factories run around the clock. Men and women, black, white, Cajun, immigrant, work side by side, earning equal pay at a time when segregation still rules the South. Higgins ignores the social rules that others cling to.
He says, "I don't care if they're from Harlem or from hell. If they can build boats, they've got a job." New Orleans transforms into an industrial hive. Trucks bring in lumber and steel from every direction. Sparks fly as welders lay down beads on hull frames. The smell of resin and machine oil mixes with gumbo from food stalls outside the gates. The Mississippi River carries test boats to the Gulf, where prototypes are pushed to their limits in waves and wind. Every boat is inspected. Every boat must perform. Higgins walks the lines in his factory like a man on a mission, shouting encouragement one moment and cursing the next. Workers say he could spot a bad plank from 50 feet away. When a batch of rivets fails inspection, he orders the entire load dumped in the river, not to make a point, but to make it clear that nothing less than perfect will do. Meanwhile, the war grows. By 1943, his factories produce thousands of landing craft a month. They pour out of New Orleans and scatter to every ocean: the Mediterranean, the Pacific, the English Channel. The Navy that once doubted him now can't fight without him. They start calling him the man who won the war before it started. But for Higgins, it isn't glory that drives him. It's the work itself, the act of building something that solves a problem. In interviews, he's blunt. He says, "The boys need boats. We make boats." That's it. Simple, direct, and true. Back in Europe, generals like Eisenhower and Bradley are planning for D-Day. They need to land over 150,000 men on the beaches of Normandy in a single day. Without Higgins boats, it's impossible. The LCVPs are the bridge between sea and shore, between plan and execution. Each one carries 36 fully equipped soldiers or a jeep in a squad. When the ramp drops, they are no longer passengers, they're combatants. In the months leading up to June 1944, shipyards and docks across Britain fill with these craft. British sailors joke that they smell like a Louisiana swamp. American officers walk among rows of them, knowing these small, ugly boxes will be the first things to touch French sand. Higgins, back in New Orleans, keeps building. He doesn't attend strategy meetings or ceremonies. He stays in his office, chain-smoking and reading telegrams. When he hears about the landings, he doesn't celebrate. He just nods and says, "They made it." For him, that's enough.
His boats have carried Marines through the Pacific, at Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, and now soldiers across the Channel. Every time the ramp drops, it's a small piece of Louisiana grit hitting foreign sand. As the war pushes toward its bloody conclusion, one truth becomes clear. No invention, no general, no machine gun has shaped the way the Allies fight quite like Andrew Higgins's crazy idea. But the story doesn't end when the shooting stops, because once the war ends, the world that needed Higgins suddenly moves on, and the man who helped win it discovers how quickly a hero can be forgotten. When the war ends in 1945, the world exhales. The beaches that once echoed with gunfire are quiet again, and the water that carried Higgins' boats turns calm. In New Orleans, the factories that roared night and day begin to slow down. The men and women who once built landing craft now wait for new orders that never come. Higgins stands at the edge of one of his production floors, looking over a space that used to thunder with hammers and saws. Now it's mostly silence. Dust hangs in the sunlight that pours through broken windows. A handful of workers sweep the floors or stack leftover lumber. The war that made him indispensable has ended, and so has the need for his boats. For a while, there's talk of contracts for peacetime projects, pleasure boats, patrol craft, even commercial ferries. But Higgins tries to pivot. He builds prototypes for the Coast Guard, sketches for yachts, even a few designs for post-war shipping companies. But the government's attention has moved on. Military spending shrinks overnight. New competitors emerge, backed by larger corporations that can build cheaper and faster. Higgins, who once had the ear of generals and presidents, now struggles to get a phone call returned. He isn't the kind of man to fade quietly. Reporters still visit him, expecting the same fire that once challenged Navy officers and bureaucrats. They find it still burns, but it burns differently now. Shorter, sharper, edged with disappointment. In one interview, he says, "They needed me when there was trouble. Now they act like I never existed." Still, Higgins doesn't stop building. He keeps his main yard alive as long as he can. He pays workers from his own pocket at times, refusing to lay them off until the last possible day. He tries to turn his wartime success into a peacetime legacy, founding a technical school to train craftsmen, pushing for industrial education in Louisiana. He dreams of turning New Orleans into a permanent hub for boat building. But the post-war economy has other ideas.
The Navy, now standardized and bureaucratic again, shifts toward metal-hulled designs built in massive corporate yards. Plywood and swamp ingenuity no longer fit the image of a modern fleet. Contracts dry up. By 1948, most of Higgins Industries is shuttered. The man who once employed over 20,000 Americans now operates a handful of small projects. His offices still smell faintly of varnish and tobacco. The walls are lined with photos of landing craft at Normandy and the Pacific, reminders of the legacy few seem to remember. He keeps one image framed above his desk: a Higgins boat on Omaha Beach, half submerged, ramp down, soldiers pouring out into the surf. To the men who rode in them, those boats were lifelines. Years later, veterans would write to Higgins letters of thanks, some short and simple. "Your boat got me to the beach." Others longer, describing how the ramp dropped, how the bullets hit the water, how the craft that carried them held steady until their boots hit sand. Higgins saved every one. He never forgot that his work meant survival for people he would never meet. General Dwight Eisenhower once said, "Andrew Higgins is the man who won the war for us." It wasn't a headline, it was something Eisenhower said quietly, knowing the truth of it. Without Higgins' boats, the landings at Normandy, Sicily, and dozens of Pacific islands might have been impossible. Higgins heard that quote once. He smiled, but only for a moment, and said, "The boys did the winning. I just built the boats." In his final years, Higgins' health begins to fade, but his sharpness never does. He spends his mornings walking the old docks, tipping his hat to workers who still remember when the factory thundered with life. The river keeps moving, the same as it always has. To him, it's a reminder that everything built by hand eventually returns to the current. The boats, the war, the noise, the memory. He dies in 1952 at 65 in the same city where his dream began. At his funeral, a few veterans attend quietly, their medals glinting in the sun. They don't say much. They don't have to. They know what his boats meant. In time, history rediscovers him. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans stands today partly because of the legacy of his invention and the city he helped put on the map. In one of its exhibits, a restored LCVP sits under bright lights, its wooden hull sanded smooth, its ramp hanging open. Visitors walk up to it and imagine what it must have been like to ride that craft toward a beach under fire. What they're looking at isn't just a boat. It's a piece of determination shaped into wood and steel, born in a swamp, tested in surf, and proven in war. Andrew Higgins never wore a uniform, never fired a shot, never stepped onto a battlefield. But his fingerprints are on every shore the Allies ever landed. The men who rowed his boats carried rifles. He carried ideas. And in a war of steel and strategy, it was his crazy idea, a wooden box with a front door, that changed the shape of victory itself.